A Roman writer named this British town in the year 77, and people still live there today. 10 towns made this list, and each one can prove a real claim to being among Britain's oldest. Every entry gets a real, current house price too. Not a guess, dressed up for tourists. Subscribe if you want real history without the sales pitch, because every place here comes with an honest catch. The last name on this list isn't the biggest one here, but it holds the strangest founding story of the 10. Let's start where Britain's story actually starts. Number 1 on this list is Colchester in Essex. A Roman writer named Pliny the Elder wrote about it in the year 77. He called it Camulodunum, a town in Britain, and that single line makes Colchester the oldest recorded town in the entire country. It was the first capital of Roman Britain, built up as the main base after the conquest, and the town never really stopped growing from there. Walk through the middle of Colchester today and you're standing on layers of history stacked directly on top of each other. Colchester Castle holds the largest Norman keep ever built in Europe, and builders raised it straight onto the foundations of the old Roman Temple of Claudius. Roman walls still run through parts of the town, and the Tudor Dutch Quarter sits just beyond them. Roman, Norman, and Tudor brickwork all sit within a few minutes' walk of one another. Here's the honest part before this gets too romantic. Colchester officially became a city in 2022, so it isn't technically a town anymore, and daily life here matches that change. It's a long-standing garrison town, home to army units including the 16th Air Assault Brigade. It also carries the shops, the traffic, and the tourist crowds that come with being a working city rather than a quiet market town. Property sites put the average house here at around £300,000, which sits close to the UK average of roughly £270,000, just a little above it. Colchester gives you the deepest, most stacked history on this entire list, built right into the streets you'd walk every day. The catch is you're paying close to national average money for city-sized noise and a garrison's worth of bustle, not a sleepy retreat. Number 2 is Carmarthen, in Carmarthenshire, and it makes a real case for being the oldest town in Wales. The Romans built a fort here around the year 75, calling it Morydunum, which means sea fort. It ran as the administrative centre for the local Demetae tribe under Roman rule. The proof isn't just a name on an old map either. Carmarthen still has one of only 2 surviving Roman amphitheatres in the whole of Wales, and one of just 7 left standing anywhere in Britain. Archaeologists dug it out in 1968. It turns out to be the most westerly Roman amphitheatre in the entire Roman Empire. A strange thing for a modest Welsh county town to be able to claim. Then there's Merlin. The Welsh name Carmarthen gets translated as Merlin's Fort. A monk named Geoffrey of Monmouth wrote back in 1188 that Merlin was born in a cave just outside town. Treat that one as legend rather than history. Some language experts actually think it ran the other way around, with the wizard's name borrowed from the town rather than the town named after him. Now here's the honest part. Carmarthen is a working county town rather than a picture postcard village. Property sites have been reporting a real fall in prices lately, down to somewhere around £200,000 to £240,000, well under the national average. So you get genuine Roman engineering and a legendary wizard's birthplace for a fraction of what history usually costs. You're buying into a functional town centre though, not a scene built for photographs. Number 3 takes us somewhere far older than either Roman entry so far. Whithorn in Dumfries and Galloway is where Saint Ninian built a stone church called Candida Casa, the shining white church, in the year 397. That's before St. Patrick ever reached Ireland, and before the monks of Iona existed, which makes Whithorn the cradle of Christianity in Scotland by a wide margin. Whithorn grew into a royal burgh, a town with its own royal charter granting trading rights. it became one of the great medieval pilgrimage sites in Britain, drawing visitors for centuries after Ninian's death. Kings and commoners alike walked here to visit his shrine. That flow of pilgrims shaped the local economy for hundreds of years before the Reformation brought it to a stop. It's small today, and it was chosen for this list because of its age rather than its size, which is worth saying plainly rather than pretending otherwise. The catch here is straightforward. Property data is thin because cependant few homes change hands in Whithorn. The figures that do exist put average prices somewhere between £164,000 and £219,000 among the cheapest towns on this whole list. That price comes with real remoteness attached. This is rural Dumfries and Galloway, a small population, and quiet that can tip into isolated once you actually need a service nearby. Research into health and care access for older people in Britain keeps flagging exactly this problem in rural areas. Services get slower to reach and transport links get thinner the further you sit from a larger town. Whithorn sits about as far out on that scale as anywhere on this list. Number 4 is Malmesbury in Wiltshire, widely considered England's oldest borough. A borough in this sense meant a market town with its own legal rights, and Malmesbury has held that status longer than anywhere else in the country. Historians attribute its founding charter to Alfred the Great, granted around the year 880. The town still sits on a hilltop, almost fully encircled by the River Avon, which is exactly why locals call it the Queen of Hilltop Towns. The whole town centre is built from the same honey-coloured stone that runs through the Cotswolds. That's part of why heritage guides keep ranking it among the prettiest boroughs in Wiltshire. The abbey here holds the tomb of Aethelstan, the first king to rule over all of England, buried in the year 939. A monk named Aylmer supposedly strapped wings to his arms and jumped from the abbey tower. It's Britain's first recorded attempt at human flight, centuries before anyone else even tried. Between a buried king and a flying monk, Malmesbury has more raw story per square mile than almost anywhere else on this list. Here's the honest part, and it's the first real cost warning on this countdown. Malmesbury sits right at the edge of the Cotswolds. Property sites put average prices anywhere from £379,000 up past £500,000, depending on the source. Comfortably above the national average either way. That gap between sources is one of the widest on this whole list. It's usually a sign that a handful of larger houses are enough to pull the average up on their own. Keep that number in mind, because by the time we reach the end of this list, Malmesbury won't look expensive anymore. Number 5 is Shaftesbury in Dorset, another hilltop town that Alfred the Great built up on purpose. He founded an abbey here in 888 and installed his own daughter as its first abbess. The abbey grew so wealthy, it became the richest nunnery in England. King Canute died in Shaftesbury in 1035, which tells you this wasn't some backwater outpost, it mattered. Shaftesbury and the next 2 entries on this list all trace back to that same defensive building programme Alfred ran against Viking raids. Keep an eye on how the prices climb together as we go. Most people have actually seen Shaftesbury without knowing its name, because Gold Hill, the steep cobbled street lined with old cottages, is the hill from the Hovis bread advert. It's one of the most photographed streets in the country. The row of cottages leading down that hill still looks close enough to the version in the advert that photographers keep coming back for the same shot decades later. Here's the honest part. Fame carries its own price tag, and Shaftesbury's does too, with average house prices running from around £320,000 up to £349,000, well above the national average. Gold Hill draws real tourist footfall on top of that, cameras and coach parties included. So you're not buying it into an undiscovered street. You're buying into one the whole country already recognises. Number 6 is Wareham, also in Dorset. and this is Alfred the Great's defensive building at its most literal. He walled the town against Viking raids, and the grid of streets he laid out, along with the earthwork ramparts around it, still survive today. You can walk the walls exactly as they were built more than 1,000 years ago. That walk takes you in a full loop around the entire historic core. St Martin's Church here is the most complete Saxon church left standing anywhere in Dorset. It has stood on this exact spot, largely unchanged since Alfred's own lifetime, which is rare enough that heritage guides single it out by name. Here's the honest part, and it's the same one as the last two entries. Average prices in Wareham run from around £390,000 up to £416,000. That's down about 7% from a 2023 peak of nearly £449,000, but it still sits well above the national average. That local dip actually echoes a wider pattern too. Government figures for the same period show UK house prices overall also slipped slightly month on month, even as the yearly trend kept climbing. Wareham's small pullback isn't an isolated story. It's part of a bigger national wobble. 3 towns in a row now, all built by the same king, all carrying the same kind of premium. That streak breaks with the next entry, so if the last few price tags have felt steep, relief is coming. 6 towns down, 4 to go, and thank you for sticking with this one this far. This channel exists to show Britain's history and its property market with real numbers attached, not tourist board polish. If that's useful to you, consider hitting like and subscribing before we move on to the coast. Number 7 is Totnes in Devon, England's second oldest borough. King Edward the Elder, Alfred's own son, fortified it as a defensive borough in the year 907, replacing an earlier fort nearby at Holwell. A borough in Saxon terms was simply a fortified town built for defence, and it is the same system that produced every Wessex-founded entry on this list. Set into the pavement of Fore Street is the Brutus Stone, where legend says Brutus of Troy first stepped ashore to found Britain. A writer named Geoffrey of Monmouth put that story into print around the year 1136. Treat that one as folklore rather than fact, the same way we treated Carmarthen's Merlin legend. Totnes Castle came later, a motte and bailey fortress built around 1087 by Duhel of Totnes, a follower of William the Conqueror. It is one of the best preserved Norman castles in England, and it earned that survival the easy way. It was never besieged and never fought over, and it slid gently into abandonment by the 1500s instead of burning down in some dramatic siege. Here's the honest part, and this one is about reading the numbers correctly rather than about cost or remoteness. Land registry. Figures put the actual town centre at around £287,900, while the wider area average runs from £410,000 up to £434,000. That gap exists because larger homes categorised across the outlying parish pull the wider number up. If you are browsing listings for Totnes online, filter carefully by the town's own postcode area. A search that pulls in the wider parish will make the whole place look far pricier than it actually is at street level. If you are looking at Totnes and comparing prices, make sure you know which number you are actually looking at before you get either excited or discouraged. Number 8 is Sandwich in Kent, one of the original clinker ports and one of the most complete medieval towns left in England. The Cinqueports were a group of coastal towns in Kent and Sussex that supplied ships and men to the crown in exchange for trading privileges. Sandwich was one of the original 5, alongside Dover, Hastings, Hythe and Romney. The town has more than 500 listed buildings, giving it the highest density of listed buildings per person of any town in the country. Strand Street is believed to hold the longest unbroken run of medieval timber frame buildings anywhere in England. Fishergate, built in 1384 down on the quay, is the only one of the town's original medieval gates still standing. It is Grade 1 listed, the highest protection status a building in England can carry. Sandwich used to be a genuine seaport, big enough that roughly 600 ships could gather in its harbour at once. Then the Wonsum Channel silted up over the centuries, and the sea simply left. Andridge now sits about 2 miles inland, frozen at the exact moment the water walked away from it. Here is what surprised me about Sandwich. Average prices swing wildly depending on the source, from around £279,000 up to £412,000, but the town sits at or below the Kent County average either way. The real catch is not the price, it is ownership itself. With this many listed buildings packed into one small town, conservation rules limit what you are allowed to change on a property you actually own. You are a custodian of the house as much as its owner. Number 9 is Faversham, also in Kent, likely once a summer capital for the Saxon kings of Kent. Records place it in royal hands by the year 811, when a charter from King Coenwulf of Mercia called it the King's Little Town of Faversham. The Domesday Book later recorded it too, under the slightly different spelling Favershant, and the name itself is believed to mean Smith's Homestead. Faversham went on to join the wider confederation of the Cinque Ports in the 13th century, supplying its own vessel to Dover under that same arrangement. Shepherd Neame calls 1698 its official founding date, but town records show brewing happening on that exact same site since 1573, more than a century earlier. Even that isn't the real start. Faversham Abbey, founded in 1147, already ran its own brewhouse making ale for the monks. That means people were brewing on this ground 500 years before the famous name above the brewery door. Here's the honest part. Multiple property sites all land in a tight cluster here, somewhere between £337,000 and £358,000, making this the single most consistently reported price on the entire list. That consistency actually tells you something useful. When property portals agree this closely, it usually means enough homes sell here regularly for the number to be trustworthy. That's unlike some of the smaller, thinner markets earliest on this list. It's not the cheapest town we've covered, and it's not the most expensive either. Faversham sits squarely in the middle, solid rather than a bargain. Number 10, and the final town on this list, is Kirkwall in Orkney, and its story starts with a killing rather than a king. In the year 1117, two cousins, Magnus and Haakon, jointly ruled Orkney as earls, and their followers hated each other bitterly. The two men agreed to meet and settle it, each bringing only 2 ships to the island of Egilsay. Haakon broke that agreement. He ordered his own cook, a man named Lifolef, to kill Magnus after everyone else in his party refused. Lifolf did it with a single axe blow to the head. Earl Rognvald Colson, Magnus's nephew, avenged that killing in the most permanent way available to a Viking earl. He promised the people of Orkney a stone cathedral grander than anything else on the islands if they backed his claim to power. Construction on St Magnus Cathedral began in 1137. Builders raised it from alternating bands of red sandstone quarried near Kirkwall and yellow sandstone shipped in from the island of Ede. That's exactly why the building still looks two-toned today. It's the oldest cathedral in Scotland and the most northerly cathedral anywhere in Britain. Orkney itself only became Scottish in 1468. Before that, Norway ruled these islands directly, and that Norse burgh status sets Kirkwall apart from every Saxon-founded town earlier on this list. In 1486, King James III of Scotland formally handed the cathedral to Kirkwall's own townspeople, rather than to the church hierarchy. To this day, it remains the only cathedral in Scotland still holding the actual bones of its patron saint. Monks hid those remains, both Magnus and Rognvald, inside the building's pillars to protect them during the Reformation. Their bones weren't found again until the 20th century, still hidden exactly where those monks had left them. Here's the honest part, the one that ties this entire list together. Kirkwall's average house price runs somewhere between £188,000 and £207,000. Read that again, because that's a real 2026 price for a town built around the oldest cathedral in Scotland. It makes Kirkwall the cheapest or second cheapest town on this whole countdown, undercutting even the wider Orkney average of about £265,000. Remember Malmesbury sitting up near £400,000 to £500,000 back at number 4. Put next to Kirkwall's number, that Cotswolds price tag suddenly looks a lot less like ancient charm. It reads instead like a Southeast postcode premium, exactly as promised earlier. The real cost isn't money, it's distance. Orkney is reached by ferry or a short flight from the Scottish mainland. The weather and travel time are the actual price you pay for this history, not the house itself. That's the strangest founding story we promised you at the start. A cousin's murder in 1117 that produced the building still defining this whole town 9 centuries later. Ancient, beautiful and affordable rarely all show up in the same place without one honest string attached. And Kirkwall proves that better than any other town on this list. So there it is. 10 towns, 10 different centuries, and 10 honest catches, from a Roman name recorded in the year 77 to a Viking murder that built a cathedral. Tell me in the comments which one you'd actually pack a van for, and which one surprised you the most.